Scrooge awoke in his room to find it changed. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living vines that it looked a perfect grove. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, juicy oranges, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. Punch is for old witches only. Reclining on the sofa sat a giant who bore a flaming torch, and as Scrooge peered near at the enormous person, he bellowed, "Come in! Come in! I am the ghost of Christmas present. Have you ever walked with my elder brothers?" "Don't think I have," said Scrooge. "Have you many brothers, Spirit?" "More than 1,800. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe!" Scrooge did as he was told, and soon as he held the garment, the room and its contents vanished, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Even old witches love a Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed invisible straight to Bob Cratchit's house, where on the doorstep the spirit sprinkled blessings with his torch. And then uprose Cratchit's wife and laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose, had known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onions. These young Cratchits danced upon the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "What has ever got your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit. And in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes dammed up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming?" said Bob. Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it only were in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit. "As good as gold," said Bob. "And better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size, and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it at all at last, yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onions to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Hello, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a wash day, that was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with the laundresses next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard, so firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedlit with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly, too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. At last, the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the judge, however, as well as the golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. And then Bob proposed. "A Merry Christmas to all of us, my dears. God bless us." "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob. "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "The odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer. "Christmas Day." Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, and from the mere relief of Scrooge the baleful being done with, the chestnuts in the jug went round, and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy. They were grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. This was all a great surprise to Scrooge. As this scene vanished, he heard a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, and gleaming room, with the Spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew. "He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it, too." "More shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece. "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew, "who suffers by his ill whims. Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He didn't lose much of a dinner." After tea they had some music. Then they set to a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions yes or no. The fire of questioning elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal. Rather a disagreeable animal, an animal that growled and grunted, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and was not a horse, or a cow, or a cat, or a bear. At last, the plump sister cried out, "I know what it is, Fred! I know what it is! It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Suddenly, as they stood together in an open place, the bell struck 12. Scrooge looked upon him for the ghost and saw it no more. At last the stroke ceased to vibrate. He beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him.